And I'd like to welcome everybody today to our presentation on 8 ways to create an infrastructure that supports Lean. This is presented by myself. I am Jeff Hajek from the Gotta Go Lean blog. I have a company called Valaction Continuous Improvement. And I'm joined today by Tim McMahon. We've been doing these webinars together for probably 7 or 8 months now, so we've got quite a few of them posted on YouTube, and you can see them on our websites. So feel free to go and check those out, the previous webinars. So I'm going to go ahead and get started on this one. So Tim, why don't you talk us through a little bit about what lean thinking is and what the biggest things that make it work are?
Well, I think this is a great topic because this is one that I think we're frequently asked about is how you support lean thinking, and I use that term because I like it as a means of saying that lean is one of those things in which you do have to think about. It challenges your status quo and those kind of concepts that you might be traditionally used to. So I prefer that term. I think it starts with the foundation probably being leadership. We're going to talk a little bit about that today as part of the infrastructure. But there's another element, that goes along with that, and that's competency. How well do you know the concepts? How well do you use the concepts? What resources do you have available to you to learn, benchmark, implement those kind of techniques that you see? And then what is the support mechanism, or what we call the infrastructure, to kind of make all those things work together in harmony? And we're going to focus most of the time our discussion on the infrastructure needed to create a lean thinking process.
Yeah, and that's really what we're going to be focusing on today. And Tim and I both, the way we set these things up, we come up with a topic and we both pitch in our ideas. And Tim's approach, as he looked at infrastructure, he was looking at the strategic ways of building a strategic infrastructure where your culture and everything come together to give you that, basically the framework that you can lay continuous improvement on. I took a different approach with my ideas, and I went more on a tactical level of here are some specific things that you can do, the physical things you can do to support what Tim's talking about. So as you go through this presentation, you'll see the different styles as Tim and I alternate back and forth of how we both approach creating this infrastructure.
So I think when you talk about the infrastructure, it's kind of like a three-legged stool you see, and you kind of have to have all those elements. So the key thing is really looking at the leadership portion for me, at least initially, is what direction do you want to go? How do you communicate that direction to people? What's the means in which you're going to get there? So I mean, that's really the fundamental job of leaders in the organization, is to paint that picture and get people to work on getting there. When you do that, that makes decision making and the steps you're going to take in order to get to that final state much easier. It's more consistent across the organization because you have everybody who kind of sees where we need to go, and maybe not exactly every step to get there, but it certainly makes getting along the path much easier. The other thing I would say is that when you don't have that direction is you can have a lot of circular kind of activities, people going in different tangents, and kind of it's wasteful activity in some regards because you only have a limited amount of resources and time and people, and so you really want to be focusing all your energy in that key direction for your company. Of course, this will help leading into other avenues of strategy development, strengthening the team, and individual contributors, and how to develop those people, which we'll talk a little bit about. If you want further points, I kind of put a couple links in throughout the presentation. You'll see, but there's a couple of interesting points on leadership. You can kind of follow up later on that as well. You see the link there in the presentation.
Okay, so as you build up this strategy and this vision, there's a lot of different things you put in place. And one of the things we put in place is 5S. And what I have found is as people get their offices and their work areas more 5S'd, they have less space and less what I call the extraneous tools for making improvements. So if you're working in whatever your process is and you don't have space for a label maker or for a laminator or things like that in the office environment, or things, a additional hand tools for doing project work, for putting together Beeline or Creeform or things like that. What you really need is to have a dedicated project area. And what this does is it tries to take away that conflict between removing all the extra items from your work area and needing all that space and those extra items to really be able to make improvements. So in a lot of effective organizations I've seen, were you going to say something, Tim?
No, go ahead.
Oh, okay. A lot of effective organizations I've seen have created dedicated project areas. And these project areas are basically workshops that are community workshops, and they provide a range of things. And the first is it gives them people a space to work. So they're not going and trying to fit a project into their actual well-designed, well-5S workspace. It has community tools that people can borrow and have access to without having to spend a lot of investment in every individual area and without having to scrounge. Because when you have a bit of time that becomes available for continuous improvement, the last thing you want to do is waste it looking for screwdrivers or 9/16 wrench or a pair of scissors or whatever it is that you're looking for your project. If you have them all immediately available, you make much, much better use of that time. And the other thing that I promote when I tell people to do is put in a range of materials. And as you do continuous improvement in your organization, you'll see what's commonly used. Lamination materials is very common. Labels, label makers, floor tape, all the different things you use when you're making improvements, you put into your community workshop. But you put it on a Kanban. And you'll have to develop a system for how you pay for it and who's providing the money to keep this thing stocked. But the idea is you never want to run out. So you focus on that. Now I've got a new thing here. I got a couple of hands raised. So I'm trying to figure out how to go about doing this. So I got a couple of people have had it up for quite a while. Daryl and Martin, if you have some questions, why don't you type them out and I'll put you on the air. If it's something that you want me to cover right now. Otherwise, I'll continue on until I see your question pop up.
Now, Jeff, I think you're going to cover this later, but what's your thought on dedicated resources to align with these dedicated project areas?
Well, I do cover that later. And what you find is, there's a lot of processes that you have to put in as to be able to operate this improvement workshop, and there's some maintenance that goes into it, and keeping it orderly and training people, and that's all stuff that'll happen from a person who might be on your resource team. So anytime you put together a project area like this, you have to have some responsibility for who's in charge of it. What I found over the years, and not just in continuous improvement, but in any leadership position, if you have a community ownership of a problem or a project or a task, it doesn't get done. And you need to have an individual who's assigned and in certain, to have that direct responsibility with the authority to go with it. And that's the resource team that we'll be talking about in a little bit. So bumping back up to the top level, and in this resource team that you're talking about, and just across the whole organization, you need to have that training, right, Tim?
Yeah, I think for me, this is something we agree on, is that the knowledge is the lever that changes the speed of anything you want to implement in your organization. And you'll see that Jeff and I spend a lot of time focusing on training, whether it's through writing or various materials, because that is so critical to lean. So, this isn't just something you can do haphazardly. We know you have to be really dedicated to doing this. And so it's important that you find those experts, whether they're internally to the company or externally. You do need that support structure that helps you gain that knowledge and kind of show you the way to get to where your true north position is. It's really important to have that structure, and that's one of the reasons we're covering that in the infrastructure. It's also critically important to look at the skills that you have today and kind of forecast what skills you think you might need, especially as you look at your strategy several years out and say, well, I can do these types of skills, but going forward, I might need to know about Kanbans and Pokio and standard work and maybe Hoshin planning. So these are other kind of things you're going to need in the future, and how are you going to get those skills that you might not have today? Certainly there's a number of avenues to do that. And coming up with then those comprehensive training plans to look at closing those gaps.
Well, one of the things, when I was reading through this as we started to develop this program, this is when it really struck me, and it's not something that most people do, and there's a lot of insight into this about not only training for your current needs, but looking to the future needs. And as you go down this lean journey, you look forward and you see that you'll be competing at a much higher level a year or 2 years from now, and getting the skills. Some of these skills, if you're talking about the skills of something like an A3 report, it's not something that you can learn overnight. So by the time you need that skill, you need to have it well developed in advance. So if you're looking down the road and thinking you'll be putting, like you said, the Hoshin planning or Kanbans in place or things like that, you can't learn those skills overnight. So projecting the future skills is something that's really falls through the cracks a lot.
Yeah, I think you got a good point there. And for me, a lean organization is a learning organization, and you can kind of learn a little bit about that through this link, learning continuously. But I think it's important not just to be constantly learning, but to look at what are the things you need to have in your business or your toolkit, to help you in the future, and saying, okay, we have to come up with a training program this year to cover what we're going to need to know for knowledge next year, kind of thing. And look several years out. I think that's really critical.
Absolutely. So, and one of the ways you do that is you build that lean library. So if you start putting these expectations on people to learn, you have to give them the resources to be able to learn. And as committed as employees are, many of them just don't have the money to go out and buy a bunch of lean DVDs or to build their own personal library. So what you need to do is you need to provide that to them. When I talk library, the first thing people think about is just books. And of course, I think you should put books in your library, and of course, multiple copies of the staple books is important. And I put my book on here. This is my little self-promotion here. But there's a lot of books that are really considered, the lean classics, and there's Lean Thinking, there's The Toyota Way, Learning to See. These are ones that are real staple books in your lean library. And I say multiple copies because you want a lot of people reading them, but you also want to have the opportunity to do kind of learning lunches and book clubs and things like that. And if you put it in a lean library, you can create that as an option for your junior supervisors, maybe to start developing these kind of programs and teaching different chapters of books, or putting those those organized learning that Tim was talking about in place. And you need that lean library to be able to do that. And of course, there's DVDs, posters. I recommend getting a library of posters and rotating them out, because after about 2 or 3 days of seeing the same poster, people become numb to them. So if you can keep that, a fresh poster on the hallway coming into your building, and you change it out, every week you put a new poster up, you'll get people interested in it. QRCs are quick reference cards. You can hand those out to people. Maybe there's just a list of, your Kanban rules or things like that. Training materials, anything that you have in terms of PowerPoints, any of the presentations materials you have like that. But also any training kits. There's a lot of lean Lego kits, and I sell a lot of this stuff on my site. And again, I'll limit my promotion to that. But there's a lot of different opportunities to get training materials, and if you have a place where you can check it out, different people can train more, and you can share those resources, keep your costs down. And one of the limiting factors about lean training materials is their cost. And if you can share those costs across a broader organization, you can make lean training more accessible, and you can get more people with those skills that Tim was talking about. You also want to have all your forms and tools. You want to have those all located in your lean library. And again, this can be a combination of virtual and physical. And those forms will keep consistency across your organization. Any of your internal process documents about how you run your continuous improvement program, any kind of planning materials, planning tools, checklists, all the things that you need to run your program should be organized in a neat location, so anybody can, who wants to go and extend their lean program within their smaller, subgroup of your organization, so they can have access to it. And finally, best practices. And this is probably the one that I see least often, where everybody's used to doing things the way they do it, but they never think of what they're doing as anything special. And if you can start taking those things that you do in each of the organizations, each of the sub-teams in your company, and record those and document them, and if you can get sophisticated and put it in a database where people can search keywords, all those things will make it spread more quickly. And what you'll find is if you have a good library of best practices, when people are using, when they're doing continuous improvement, they'll take a look and see if somebody else has already done this. Now, generally what you find is the best practice database is your lean practitioners, the people like Tim who support lean in the organization. He's seen it all in his organization. So he wanders around the company and he knows if Group A is looking for something, he knows Group J has that in place already, and he can take a little tour over there and look at it. Best practice database or some kind of library of best practices substitutes for Tim. There's no segue here, Tim. I'm just going to jump right into the next slide.
I know what you mean. I think we all think that we can do things individually, and Jeff and I do quite a lot on our own. But of course, we like it when we come together and pull something like this off. So we see the value of teamwork, both in and outside of our businesses and our daily functions. It's true. Some of the individuals is the teamwork is an essential part of this. So that's one of the ways you cross-pollinate within your organization as well. So as you want to try to change that culture, teamwork is one of those mechanisms that you're going to be able to do that. But you also get the speed, if you get everybody kind of working in the same mindset, solving the same one problem together, and so you can get things done that a little bit faster. Teams also need to be looked at as an opportunity to mentor and develop those. This is something that many times you miss. You throw a bunch of people together and they can't work together. So you can't just expect that. Teams need to have a lot of common goals and objectives and means in which they're going to solve problems. And Jeff and I did a webinar about a couple months back detailing exactly how to make cross-functional teams work together. So if you haven't caught that yet on YouTube or one of our sites, you should definitely follow up on that activity. There's a number of good points in that. Try it, Jeff.
Yeah, I think one of the big things about cross-functional teams is it just doesn't happen by accident. Just putting people together doesn't create a cross-functional team. It has to be developed. You have to have, like, even back to your competency or your training comments, you have to project out what are your team's needs in the future, how do you build the skill sets as you develop and as you change. We do have a question here, and you may be able to help answer this one, Tim. Best practices. Do you have a program you recommend? And this is from Brian. One of the things I've seen, just simple access databases where people can put in a couple contact names, and you put that online. It can be as simple as just a simple form. If you could even do best practices with Kaizen report outs where you archive your Kaizen report outs. And it's really nice the way computers are nowadays with the search functions. You can very easily search. You can put it on an internal intranet so that you can find it much more quickly with any kind of, like I said, the search functionality when you start looking for keywords. One of the keys that you have to do is as you document this, you have to get enough content behind it so that the searches can find it. So that's the recommendation I'd have with that. I haven't seen any good lean database programs. I reached out to a friend of mine, an old MBA friend who has a company. I just haven't followed up on that, but just to talk about some options for databasing, continuous improvement. And I've started to hear some buzz about new companies that are coming up or new support systems for lean. But I haven't seen anything that has been running, an off-the-shelf type of thing that runs effectively. Have you, Tim?
No, I haven't. But a couple things that I would do, based on the size of your organization, is one is to read across. That's what we call it. To read across your entire organization. So if you have an improvement activity occur in one small department or cell, have them present out to a larger cross-section of the company, because you often can learn great ideas that way. The other thing is you could create some sort of monthly conference call with other locations if you're a multi-site company, and have it, the lean conference call or whatever, and share best practices. We generally do that in my company that has 8 sites globally, and what we generally do is have 2 sites present each month, so you have some sort of rotation. They present for 10 minutes, and you can do this via technology nowadays, and Another avenue you can do is to benchmark sites and companies in your geography. Look at a professional organization like American Manufacturing Excellence, or look at some sort of lean consortium you might have in your area. You know, one of the things you'll find in the lean community is that people are willing to share. They're not really worried about the competition because you're not sharing the product or ideas. You're sharing techniques and things used to run a business or a process. So I would definitely follow up on those type of things in your area.
There's also, for sharing best practices, you know, as your company gets bigger, it's a good idea to have a newsletter. And one of the things you can put in a newsletter, your company may already have one, you know, HR may put one out, but if you get best practices put into your newsletter, even if it's just a list of small ones that you've added to your best practice library or just synopsis of a few that you find wandering around, the idea is to get people knowing that a resource is there and to get people thinking about looking internally for internal best practices. So I think what we always think of is when we want to do any kind of benchmarking, we want to go and find this world-class organization. We want to look externally, but almost every organization has pockets of excellence. Everybody has things that they do really, really well, and you find those things, you spread them out, and you don't have to reinvent the wheel. You don't have to relearn anything if you can get this library of an internal resource, so all the things you already know is spread out, and it keeps you from having to reinvent the wheel every time you have a project. And again, we're talking about, you know, and I'll talk about this in this next slide over here. You know, you're looking for these multipliers of how do you create multipliers where you're not falling behind, where you're leveraging the resources. I'm using all these buzzwords, and I probably shouldn't do that, but what you're looking to be able to do is be more effective in the time that you're spending on continuous improvement. So, you know, we look at reducing waste throughout an organization, but we don't as often go in and say, how do we reduce waste in the way we reduce waste? So, you know, years back, I had a group of, there were 3 of us who worked together in a continuous improvement team, and, you know, we realized that it'd been like 2 years since anybody had actually Kaizened or Kaizen process. You know, we have all the forms and tools, but, you know, to go that long without improving it, it's just ironic that, you know, we hadn't touched it in that long. We've been using it all along. And so we went and actually did the Kaizen on our Kaizen process. And those are the kind of things you got to do to really get those multipliers. But one of the things that I also recommend is forming a resource team. And when I talk about this, I'm talking about actually dedicate people to the continuous improvement effort. And a lot of companies will have the mentors or the trainers who are part of this process, and they spread the knowledge. But I'm talking about something between you know, the frontline employee and the mentor. And what you get is, if you come up with the idea of a resource team, you can do a lot more with your continuous improvement efforts. And the first thing that they do, and the most common job they have, is backfilling. So when you want to be able to enable a team to be really effective, you know, like in the last slide, one of the things that people run into is they feel bad about going into projects because they're gone. And this is not as prevalent on the shop floor because there's a lot of systems in place already for handling absences. But if you're thinking about the person who maybe processes expense reports for the company, there's very seldom more than one person in a small company doing that. You know, it's one person's job, and nobody else knows how to do it quite as well as that person, so it's ineffective for somebody to come in. So what generally happens is all the critical stuff is handed off, but a pile is left when they come back from vacation, when they're gone. So when there's an idea, if you go ahead and ask this person who's got a specific skill set to be on a Kaizen team, you get a resistance because there's not a lot of opportunity to have somebody cover for them. So what I'm looking at here is you're trying to find a resource team. This goes way back to what Tim was talking about, cross-training. You get one person who's trained on a couple different processes, and for this group over here, the person may be trained on you know, process A for this work team, and it may be trained on process C for a different work team. So one person can support several teams by learning one thing from each group. Now the first question you might ask is, well, what happens if person C goes out on a Kaizen? Because now you slot the resource team into position A, and you got a problem, right? Well, this goes back to Tim's cross-training mentioned earlier and the cross-functional teams. If people learn more than one job and they're able to be flexible, first of all, it reduces boredom if you can rotate people around and they're not doing the same thing for years and years on end. But it also creates this flexibility. So now you have one person who can support several teams over the course of a year, and when you go and ask somebody to be in a Kaizen, that person can just go and backfill in, and you slide person, the red person over and the blue or the yellow person over, and suddenly now you've got an organization that can seamlessly cover when there's a problem, when there's either a problem when somebody has to go on, when they're sick or when they're on a Kaizen. So that's the biggest percent of time you'll have a resource team member, doing will be backfilling for others to be on process improvement projects. But they also will be this this person with some specialized skills to be able to support continuous improvement efforts. And the skills I'm talking about is welding, being able to be really good with B-line. It's a little construction material for building benches, or creeform, and it's used for racking for for parts racks, things like that. But also for office projects, for being really good with Microsoft Office or pivot tables or creating, graphics. There's a lot of specialized skills that most people don't develop in their day-to-day jobs that are really helpful to have on a continuous improvement project, and a resource team member can do that. They also can train on how to be able to use that project area I talked about earlier. And when you really need a project to hit a home run, you put this person in as a team member. You just put them into a team because they have a lot of knowledge on how to do process improvement. And they're not like a facilitator who's going to be sitting there coaching. They're actually going to be down in there doing the jobs. And they also can do a lot of pre-work to help support the Kaizen teams. So you can tap these people on the shoulder and say, could you go take times? We've done it a lot in the past. I did a lot when I was working for an organization that had a 22-minute tack time on a big assembly line, and to go and take 5 or 6 or 7 cycle times and observe for a long period of time, it would take a lot of the day for a project team. So this person went and did several cycles of observations, got it recorded, and the project team was able to go and just watch 2 or 3 cycles, and you have enough data to start making some improvements. And the other thing is this creates a development opportunity, because you want this funnel of knowledge, you want this funnel of skills that are being developed constantly, and this goes back to what Tim talked about again, see that all these things fit together. This is the mechanism for creating some of that competency that Tim talked about. So you can put a person on a resource team as a way of moving them up into the organization. A person who has 6 months on a resource team may be qualified more as a supervisor down the road because of their broader experience. So you can use it for a lot of different things.
Now, Jeff, I get this question quite a lot, and it's, do you have a Kaizen department, or do you have a Kaizen person to try to train the whole organization? So it appears that you're advocating a team approach.
Well, what I'm looking at is finding things that work for your organization. So there are, like, when you think about a really great company that's really well developed in continuous improvement, you may have, it's almost like a hump. You start out without being focused on continuous improvement. You don't have anybody dedicated. As you get more and more developed, you get more people relative to the size of the organization focused on continuous improvement, because they're the coaches, the mentors, the trainers. And as you get really good at continuous improvement, those people are now migrated back out to the organization, and a really well-developed organization is going to have a lot of black belts integrated into management jobs. So you don't need as much mentorship external to the teams. But what I'm advocating here, and I'll talk about this a little bit later in terms of time management, I'm not going to jump ahead of myself. I'll talk about that specifically, about what I'm advocating for the resource team. But I do say, we have tooling departments, and we have maintenance departments, and we have a lot of other support teams. I advocate having a team that can help you implement your continuous improvement, and you size the team based on what your needs are. So as you get, like you said, you look ahead and see what your needs are going to be, and if you have a big gap to fill to reach where your competitors are, or if you're really trying to pull ahead of them, you may need extra resources. But a nice thing about a resource team is it pays for itself, because the resource team makes your continuous improvement more effective. So it's an initial investment, but what happens after that is, once you get a team developed, they are more effective at helping you improve your productivity, which then suddenly you skip one iteration of reducing your headcount, and I'm not saying layoffs, I'm saying by attrition generally. But once you skip that one iteration, you have people who are now ahead of the curve. I had an article I wrote a long time ago about the continuous improvement wave, and it's like surfing. If you're behind the wave and you're paddling furiously, you never get that momentum going. But if you get in front of the wave and you get a little bit of that push in the backwind that's created by the resource team, it's a lot less effort to keep making the improvements, to keep making your productivity get better when you have those resources. And you'll find out that you'll make improvements faster with the resource team to help you. Is that what you're talking about, or did I just babble?
Yeah, no, and I think your key point there is it does change as your sophistication along the journey changes as well. I'm not a big advocate in the department, but I like the idea of the team approach and pulling people from other areas to specialize in some lean or specific, concepts. I think that's a much better approach than you put here.
And I look at the resource team as a pass-through job. So it's not a job that you would hire somebody into the resource team. What you would do is you would, if you have a lead on an assembly line and you think that they got some great skills and you want to basically groom them to be a supervisor or eventually a manager, you put them on the resource team for 6 months. They get a broader look at the organization, and eventually they move to that supervisor role, and they're just more well-developed when they get that broader experience.
So, I see a lot of lean literature talk about waste elimination, but I think it's an important concept to talk about. Lean's really about adding or creating value for your customers. So, linking to suppliers and customers for me as part of the infrastructure of your lean program is really an important aspect to keep track. You need to go beyond just your four walls, for instance, and we call it a supply chain because of that. There are links along the chain, and they're all critical to being able to do your service or supply your goods. It's really important that you get, partner with a couple of key suppliers, do some voice to the customer analysis, and kind of, you don't have to start with everybody at once, but, pick those key ones as you're looking at developing your strategy that are going to be important for you. And this helps create, this entire value stream approach instead of just your part, and what you can do to kind of make a win-win situation for both the supplier and the customer. Because there really, truly isn't a situation in which both parties are going to benefit. Usually nobody wants to participate. You can't take the model of let's speed up on our suppliers and get a lower price. It doesn't. Long term, that isn't a successful strategy.
Well, this is a really interesting point, and we could probably talk for hours on the psychology behind this because, Tim and I are both football fans, and we talk about that on occasion. But the whole idea of the NFL and the strike and the dispute, there's a big pile of money, and it was really about how to divide this big pile of money. And you really talk about a lot of the same things with suppliers and customers and yourself and your organization. So you're trying to figure out how do you make the pile bigger, but even no matter how big the pile is, you still have to come up with a good win-win solution for both people to feel like they're coming away with a reasonable return for what they're putting into it. So how do you manage that feeling of, I guess, like being shortchanged as you're talking to suppliers, Tim?
Well, I think it's in the approach. If you go to your supplier and you say, I need 10% cost reduction next year, that's what they're going to work for, because they'll either want to maintain your business or, if they're really fed up and they'll do something different. But that's the best you're going to get. But what if you go into a partnership and you look at your suppliers and say, whatever cost savings we come up with together, each of us get 50% of it. There's a lot more stake in the game for both sides to come up with something that works together. That's been our approach. I think it's successful. If it's not, win-win, 50-50 split, I don't think they get the same participation and buy-in. They're going to just look at making a small, 10% modification for you. You can go after year for that, but, I think if you're truly looking across your whole value stream, you're partnering and saying, what can we do together? Because, there's weight and execution times at every area. large batch sizes in both areas. So there's a lot of things you can do together and treat it like you would inside your factory or inside your business where you provide the service. Look at bringing both teams together to solving problems. And I would extend that not just externally, but also look at your internal suppliers. You got to treat them the same as you would an external supplier.
Yeah, one of the things I think you kind of talked about a little bit, but there's more in it than just the money. And if you're helping your suppliers reduce their costs and you're giving your talent and expertise to the supplier, they can use those learnings across all of their customers. So whatever you can help them and do, like when you're talking about that split, the benefit that for them may be more than just in a relationship with you. So like you're talking about is you make it a bigger picture than just here's the money. You make it so that you're looking at how can you help them be more successful, and you start that partnership approach. I like that.
And I think it also does create that long-term commitment that both teams, both parties have together. And I think if you can build that bond, you're better off together.
Okay. Well, then the next one I talk about here is capacity. And, the whole idea is when are we going to do all these things? So as you talk about a team member, there's always this feeling of, well, a team member does production work. But it's not really what you're asking them to do in a continuous improvement environment, or even in any type of environment. If you talk about a person and you have a good benefits package, that person may be on vacation 3 weeks of the year. So that's about 7% of the year they're on vacation, and they might be gone sick for a week over the course of the year. Now you're up to 10%. You're asking them to do a few minutes of maintenance at the beginning of the day, and occasionally you're on training. So if you plan on having a person equals 40 hours a week, you're going to always be behind. It means you'll be using overtime a lot to get all these other things done. And I've actually gotten into some heated debates about this, about whether or not you should budget time and say we want to have 10% of our time spent on continuous improvement. Now, there's pluses and minuses to doing that. And the minus is when you say we need to have X percent of time spent on continuous improvement, you start seeing people just doing projects because they need to check the block and hit their targets. And that's not what I'm advocating here. What I'm saying, though, is you do talk, the PDCA cycle, you talk about facts and data when you're doing A3 reports. We talk all the time in Lean about having information back up your decisions. And then we go and tell people to do something that just doesn't make any mathematical sense. So there's this big disconnect here. So what I'm saying is if you're telling people they're going to have to be in Kaizens and you want to do a continuous improvement, you can't just tell them to do it without budgeting for it. And like anything else, you have to have some numbers and some estimates and some assumptions when you're doing your budgeting. So what I'm advocating here is saying think about all the tasks you're asking people to do and budget for that. And what this will generally mean is that your headcount won't match exactly what you need just for production work. And companies are very reluctant to do this. What they tend to do is they tend to try to squeeze maintenance into the production day. They don't plan time for maintenance or for shutdown. They don't plan time for training into their staffing plans. And it's a big mistake because what you find is that people receive the message is that production trumps all, and that it is important, but if you did just production work, you would never make any improvements and your company would fail eventually. So you can't send that message. So have you ever had this discussion, Tim?
Yes, I think every company has this discussion. And I think it is one of the biggest mistakes that companies can make is they kind of mandate some sort of improvement. And as you see today, the things we talked about all take some amount of time and effort to execute. So I like to actually plan into the schedule the time for development training, for continuous improvement activities. Otherwise, what you do is you'll fill all the hours with production work, and then you'll try to blame people at the end of the day why you didn't get the improvement done. So I think as a leader in your organization, you need to be constantly looking at that. If you want them to do that, you have to free up, getting the resources and time to be able to do that. And we've talked a lot about today those things, creating the team, the people, the time, the money, the tools, all available. So This is really important to make sure you get this done well and have a process that you can do that with.
You know, what this is that whole concept of don't eat your seed corn. You know, what you want to do is you want to get a core amount of time available to devote to continuous improvement. And that time is going to make, you know, if it's 10% of your time is spent on continuous improvement or 5%, whatever percentage is that it comes out to be, that is going to make the other 95% of your time more effective and more productive and have better quality, and all that's going to save you time. So what you'll find is that, you know, the 10% makes the 95% continue to dwindle, and that's where you get your productivity savings. And what happens is there's a team, and you know what, I see this time and time again in organizations, there's a team that's completely stressed out, they're behind the 8 ball, they have huge backlogs forming, they go and make some great productivity improvements, and then the reward for that is to not get the person hired that was supposed to be hired. So they make the improvements, demand rises, and they're back in the same boat. So even though they've gone and dedicated the time, they're still struggling, but on top of that, they've had this really, really tough weeks, months of making the improvements, implementing them, and they're going to be less likely to continue to make these improvements and go that extra mile if they don't see any reward from it. Because people want to be able to get that, what's in it for me. They want to get that feeling of like, my job gets easier because of this extra effort I'm putting in, not I make the company an extra buck because I work myself to the bone for 3 weeks or 4 weeks to try and get this new process in place, and the result is we have to move somebody away to a different organization. If you do that, you're going to basically crush people's morale in terms of continuous improvement. So you got to let people reap the benefits. And you know, one of your suppliers that people always overlook, your employees are suppliers of time. You know, you're paying people to give you their time, and if you want to have a good supplier relationship with your employees, you know, you got to make sure you take care of them too and make it worth their investment and make them feel like they're getting something that they're not losing in the deal. So that's my little.
I think, you know, if you really want them to work in continuous improvement, and you kind of, you know, follow that up with asking why, you know, isn't something being done, I think you generally find they're working on something else. So, you know, as a leader or somebody that has the ability to remove roadblocks, that's your job. And so if you could free up the time somewhere else, I think that's critically important.
Yeah, just remember that continuous improvement capacity is not idle time. And I guarantee people have longer project lists than most leaders know because they just don't put it on the list. You know, they don't put it on any kind of visible list because they know it's never going to get done. So people kind of lose that hope of getting these projects done, so they don't even bring them up because they know it's not going to happen because there's no capacity to do it. If you give people the capacity to have time to go and do their improvements, you know, there's a company that, I think it was on your site, Tim, you had a video maybe about a year ago of an organization where every morning the president walks around the shop floor and asks every employee what improvement they made the previous day, and the employee shows them. And do you remember that in the video, Tim?
Yeah, they have to make a 2-second improvement as the first thing they do every day. So what that message says is that's the most important task they have to do. And he comes by and follows up to make sure that every single employee has implemented that 2-second improvement. But, you know, that becomes the primary driver and the work becomes the secondary driver. And, of course, by all these improvements, they're freeing up time, they're learning, and so all the other things fall in place. But it's important to set that message, that vision.
But the video didn't show all the support stuff that president has to have in place to do that. So the first thing is, you know, he has to have the time on his calendar to go around and do that. And he has to have the resources that people can go to. You know, I'm sure they have a workshop where people can go quickly and make those improvements. Because if you think about, if you're asking every person to do that in your organization, you have to have a lot of tools available if you're asking to do stuff every day. And by tools, I mean everything. You know, scissors and you know, spray paint or whatever it is that they need and the materials. You have to have that all available. So, in conclusion, here's just a list of what we went over. And our next webinar is coming up, and we're just talking about some random tips. So Tim does this little feature on his Facebook page where he gives a tip of the day. So we're going to look at some of those and ways to help you really speed up your lean journey. And you know, I do some some strategies in the end of my book. I have about 100 different strategies. So what we're going to do is we're going to draw from those, and we're going to talk in detail about some of the ones that we think are most effective at helping you basically, turbocharge your vehicle that you use for continuous improvement. And that'll be on September 3rd. So visit Tim's site or my site. We'll have the links up there in the next day or two. We'll also be posting this video recording and the PowerPoint slides for you to be able to download. Just some follow-up information. Tim got all fancy here and added in all his Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn groups. Tim's got a LinkedIn group, and this, so it's a lot of different tools that are available now for getting the answers that you need. So more and more, you've got a community helping you with your continuous improvement efforts. And what I'm showing here, I have a lean training system. I am in the process. I have just completed a beta test with one organization. I have a couple more tests to go through on this lean office exercise, but it's looking really good. I'm really pleased with how it's turning out. I've got a Poka-yoke Lego exercise coming up pretty soon too. And any contact information any questions you have, here's our contact information. And finally, just basic copyright stuff. For this presentation, we're pretty open with it. We're putting it out there for you to use within your organization. Take it, tweak it when you download it, do whatever you want with it within your organization. Just we ask that you don't distribute it externally. If you like it, send somebody to one of our sites to take a look at it there and download it themselves. That's all we ask. So with that, we're all wrapped up over here. So any questions? Oh, I had a contact information question. So the easy ones for me, Gotta Go Lean or Lean Dictionary will also get you to my site. Tim's is the easiest way for him, in addition to this, is aleanjourney.com, www.aleanjourney.com, and this contact information is posted there as well.
Generally, any of the links that you see on our site will get you some sort of cross-reference to all the other links. So.
Yeah, and there's a lot of resources in both of our sites. Like for Tim's, I like his tips of the day. These are just quick one-liner, two-liner ones that tell you what to do. I've got a lot of different types of resources. I have, mine's, I don't do it as frequently as Tim does.
Multimedia.
Yeah, so I got some videos and some downloads of PDF files. You can build your own lean encyclopedia with the terms on my site. So there's a lot of stuff on both of our sites. So if you haven't gone through it and really dived into them, there's a lot on both sites. So any questions at this point? We got a couple minutes left. I see people are starting to leave the webinar now. We had pretty good attendance throughout, so hopefully that means we're hitting the mark. What Tim and I always love is after this, if you can give us a little feedback. Thank you, Brian. We just had a thank you from Brian. Yeah, but any feedback you can give us, anything you'd change, anything you'd like to see, we would love to hear it. Most of how we've refined this to where it is today has come from feedback from our audience. And also, the other thing you can do to help both of us out, we're both growing a business here, growing an audience. So anything you can do to send and tell other people about it. If you like the webinars, let other people know. And really, that's all I got to say. Anything you want to say before we sign off, Tim?
No, I think, these topics really seem to hit home. If there's always, ideas for topics, if you have something that you'd like to see us discuss on one of these future webinars, feel free to drop us a line and let us know, and we'd be happy to talk about virtually any topic. I think we have a lot of expertise that we can provide and resources. So feel free, if there's something that's you got a burning question, to drop us a line, and we'll be happy to answer that or talk about it at a future webinar.
Hey, here's a really good comment. I got this from Tracy. A lot of healthcare industries are implementing lean. Please provide some examples. That's a really good idea. The thing is, though, is with Tim and I, my background, we'd have to do a little bit of extrapolation to get that into the healthcare. So I'll look for some examples. I actually did have somebody contact me yesterday, and they're developing an app that's really meant to reduce waste and lean, and I'll be doing a podcast with him. It's a private company. It's a private product. It's not like just a general lean improvement, but it's something that I think it has an application to the whole continuous improvement philosophy. So I'll be asking him some questions about the waste involved and what he's trying to accomplish with waste reduction. Thanks for putting, this is another comment, thanks for putting this information together in a way that we can implement it quickly not intimidating at all. Well, that's our goal here, is to be able to just kind of chat about it. And, you know, as we get better at this one, we'll be able to actually get people online and talking to us. So we intend this initially more as like a radio show where people call in. And it just hasn't really turned out that way. I think because of the slides, it's a new format. But that's the whole idea on this one. But I appreciate the comments, and it's intended to be very accessible. Carlos says, thanks for a short, sweet, helpful presentation. I'm trying to implement the lean I learned in manufacturing in my healthcare organization. A very challenging job. Look forward to future webinars. This is from somebody at the VHA. So that's really good to know. And I think Carlos is actually probably in a really tough situation right now with all the debt stuff that's going on. I'm sure that he's going to see some heavy pressure for debt reduction coming, for expense reduction coming up.
Anybody in government or public sector, for sure.
Yeah, and I saw that a few years ago you started seeing another VA person as well, and that's Tracy. So, but yeah, I'm seeing a lot of, lean is pretty well refined in manufacturing floors, and I think people do lean in manufacturing without even knowing it. It's just a lot of it has turned into common sense. And in the office, you're seeing more and more of it, and it's become fairly mainstream for the lean office. But healthcare, government, and I'm thinking you're going to see some more in education as, a lot of education budgets are state funded, and that's all dwindling as states start getting into the red. And you also have a lot of scholarships and grants are all federally funded, and that's going to be cut. So you're going to start seeing universities to keep, they're going to have to figure out a way to reduce costs. And I think they're not going to be able to raise tuition much more and keep people attending. There's some return where, an education at a state school doesn't provide the return once you get tuitions too high. So anyway, we're in our last minute here. I think we've covered everything here that we wanted to cover. And again, we'll post this stuff up online. And any last words, Tim?
No, just keep in mind
ever.
that keep in mind everything we talk about is not industry specific, and that's the beauty of lean. So take something that you learned today and go ahead and implement it.
Yep. Okay, with that, we'll sign off. And again, www.gottagolean.com or www.aleanjourney.com, and you'll find a lot more information on those sites. So thank you for attending. We appreciated it. This was our biggest audience to date, so that's a good sign that we're hitting the mark as our audience keeps growing. So thanks again for coming. Have a great day.